Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 1, Episode 4, CQB. This video is a part of a series of videos where I compare episodes of The Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinions on whether or not I feel these changes work. I'm by no means an expert on the Expanse novels. I'm just a guy who read the books recently and thought it'd be interesting to compare the two mediums. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to the end of season 2. However, nothing in the novels that have yet to be revealed in the show will be spoiled. So if you haven't read the novels, don't worry. Nothing that hasn't happened yet will be spoiled for you. However, I will spoil what happens in the first two novels that the first two seasons have already covered, because the whole point is pointing out the differences between the book and the show. So before I jump into analysis mode here, I think it's worth mentioning about this episode is that this, I believe, is the first great episode of The Expanse. The one that really got people to sit up and take notice of the show. I mean, I enjoyed the first three episodes and I thought they were reasonably good, but this episode was something else. And judging by other people's reactions, I can safely say this viewpoint is widely shared, as many have pointed this episode out has the first that made them realize how amazing this show actually is. So I'm going to find this a very interesting experience comparing it to its source material. Anyway, the episode begins with Miller looking over the dead body that he found in the ride, who was apparently a guy he saw on Julie's dating site list or whatever. I believe she maybe even went out on a date with him. So he talks to this coroner who rants off some exposition that actually does help build the world, so I'm not complaining. But then, he wants to recycle the body, but Miller says no, as it's obvious his detective senses are tingling, as he can tell something isn't quite right here. So as I mentioned before, this character was not in a novel, so this whole storyline of Miller finding this dead body somehow that ties to the overall story of Julie Mao was entirely an invention of the show. And seeing how that's mostly what Miller's storyline deals with in this episode, it means Miller's storyline in this episode is completely show original and not based on the books at all. But this change was okay. I liked how they used the opportunity for world building with the coroner explaining the differences in life expectancies in Earth and the Belt and so on. So I'd give this a +1. So we then move back to the Donner, where Naomi, Alex, Shed, and Amos are waiting in the holding cell while Holden is on the bridge, and they're speculating on whether or not Holden is selling them out to the Martians. So this is more of the petty bickering and finger pointing continued from the last episode that didn't exist in the books at all. And as I explained in the last episode, it doesn't add anything to the story and just comes off as a misguided attempt to add tension, as in the novels the five of them got together fine and work together as a unit, a dynamic that I much prefer, so -2. So then we go to the bridge where Captain Yao and Lopez try to convince Holden to send a message blaming Naomi for the destruction of the Canterbury and free Mars of any blame, but Holden refuses to do it. In fact, I find it rather interesting Holden is willing to risk his life rather than throw Naomi under the bus, while at the same time she's whining about how Holden is probably betraying them right now. It makes her come off as a slime ball, doesn't it? Meanwhile, the mysterious ships close on the Donner, but Yao is not at all concerned and considers it to be their fatal mistakes. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, Holden never went to the bridge in the books. The fighting broke out while he was being interrogated by Lopez, and he was then brought straight back to the room with the other Canterbury survivors, which will change the dynamic of this episode quite a bit. They never tried to convince him to blame Naomi or even to recant his accusation of Mars destroying the Canterbury. They did, however, ask him a lot about the ships coming towards them and if he knew anything about them, which he didn't. And in the novels, they referred to those ships as Belter ships, falsely assuming they were from the belt, whereas in the show, they seem less certain and simply refer to them as unidentified ships. Either way, I think each scene works for their respective mediums, so 0. Next, we get a scene with Avasarala talking to Admiral Souther over the comm, video phone, or whatever you want to call it, where he's informing her about the Dollinger coming under attack by mysterious ships. Now, just like with everything involving Avasarala in Season 1, this wasn't in the books, but this is very reminiscent of the type of relationship Avasarala had with Souther in the books. In fact, this was, I believe, the only way we saw these two interact in the books was talking over the video phone. However, in the show, they were shown to have more of an adversarial relationship, so this is kind of inconsistent from what we see in the show of these two. Seems more like their book relationship, where Souther was actually an ally that kept Avasarala informed of the goings-ons, but I suppose this could be an official relationship with Souther reporting to his superior. And it is interesting getting to see how Earth was handling the news of the Dollinger, taking Holden and the others. This is something we didn't get in the books, and it was interesting that Avasarala referred to the Canterbury survivors as their people. I suppose the Canterbury was owned by Earth-based corporations, and Holden and Amos are technically Earth citizens, although in the books you never got the sense that the UN considered the Canterbury survivors their people, nor was it implied that in the books that the UN took the Dollinger seizure of these survivors as an act of aggression. In the books, it is actually implied that the UN fully backs Mars's play here, but as I mentioned, the relationship between Earth and Mars are very different in the books than they are here in the show. Here in the show, they're kind of at a Cold War, and so Avasarala is taking this as a sign of Martian aggression and that keeping. Also, what's interesting about this scene is Avasarala and Souther talk about a fleet of mysterious ships whom they don't know who's controlling them. This dynamic was never brought up in the book, so overall I think this scene added a lot and did a lot to flesh out world building, so I'm going to give it a +4. So we go back to the Dollinger to get a scene of Yal chatting to Holden about how sometimes it's necessary to kill. I don't have much to say about this scene other than we didn't get to see much of Captain Yal in the books, although Holden's impressions were positive and that she was a good captain. So it's great to actually see more of that and see how the command structure operates on the bridge, so +1. Then we get a scene with Lopez talking to Holden about Earth, and it ends with him insulting Earthers and talking about how they all take government handouts, which is nice foreshadowing. I didn't catch this the first time around. In the novels, this wasn't explored until book 2, so I'm going to wait until season 2 before getting into this further, the whole, government handout takers situation on Earth. But overall, this conversation explores Lopez's hatred towards Earth, saying Earth is over and Mars is the future, which is only somewhat different in the books. The hostility between Earth and Mars in the show is definitely more pronounced and out in the open, but either way, this works, so 0. Next, the battle begins as the Dollinger engages the attacking ships. Now, in both the books and in the show, the Martians act like the ships are no threat whatsoever, but we do get a bit more details here than we did in the books, such as some early warnings that something isn't right when one of the officers points out that the ship's weapons are much more advanced than they expected, which Yal doesn't seem to take that much notice of and is still confident of their easy victory. It does make her come off as kind of a bad captain who underestimates her enemies. Also in the novels, they refer to the ships as Belter ships, whereas here they just call them mysterious unknown ships to make them even more of a threat, so Yal comes off as even more naive for ignoring this threat, so I'll give this a -1. So then we go back to series where Miller is investigating the dead guy and finds an underground club thingy where they're placing bets on this guy slingshotting or whatever who's going to die. Not quite sure what's going on. But then Miller soon discovers the name of the dead guy that he was referring to him as is actually incorrect, as it's actually a different guy. It's the guy who's just about to kill himself by slingshotting or whatever. So, as I said, none of this is in the books, not even close. Don't really see the point of any of this. Seems to me like they just needed something for Miller to do. So, really, this is the definition of filler, so -2. So then we go over to Tycho Station for the first time and we meet Fred Johnson. However, I'm going to reserve getting into the differences about Fred Johnson from book to show until next episode where we learn more about Fred Johnson. In this episode, we see that he was hired by the Mormons to build a huge generational ship called the Nauvoo so they can take it out into deep space. But the Mormons that hired him are getting twitchy about hiring someone with ties to the OPA, so they try to fire him, but he essentially and very subtly threatens to sabotage them if they do, so they change their minds. Now, this is an interesting way to introduce Fred Johnson. As I said before, in the first novel, there are only two viewpoint characters, Miller and Holden, so we don't actually meet Fred Johnson until Holden does. However, as I mentioned in the previous episode, in the novels, Holden receives several messages from Fred Johnson before they boarded the Dollinger, so we do meet him in the novels around this time as well, but via message. We didn't actually see the Mormons try to fire him and then him threatening them, but it's possible this could have occurred off screen, so to speak. After the Mormons leave, he orders his people to find out what's going on with the Dollinger, which is in keeping with the novels, as he also takes an interest in Holden going on board the Dollinger, even going as far as to give Holden a safe word to use to indicate if he's being coerced. All in all, I thought this was an interesting way to introduce him because we as viewers have no idea who he is or what his ties to the overall story will be, so it's very enticing. So I'll give this a +1. So then we go back to the Dollinger where it starts getting its ass kicked and the Martians are starting to realize they aren't, these other ships aren't the pushovers that they thought they were, which apparently is unheard of as these types of ships with, pack a punch to be able to stand up to the state-of-the-art Martian warship are not really known to exist. And I think the show does a pretty good job of explaining this. We see Alex and the others wondering what's going on. They can hear the sound of the railgun, so Alex drops the name of the episode, CQB, which stands for Close Quarter Battle, which apparently no ship should be able to do and survive with a Martian warship. So I believe the books go as far as to explain that CQB with a Martian warship like the Dollinger has actually never even occurred before because no one would even dare try. Back on the bridge, Holden tells Yal he recognizes the ships attacking, indicating it was the same ships that destroyed the Canterbury. Now, as I said, Holden wasn't on the bridge in the book, so no such scene ever occurred, and they never at any point specifically identified the attacking ships to the Martians like this. I think it was pretty much just assumed it was the same ships that attacked the Canterbury as they could reason it out. But I actually do like it being pointed out here, so +1. So we then cut back to Alex, Shed, Naomi, and Amos strapped to the crash couches in the holding room after the Dollinger lost gravity. Alex is freaking out and having a panic attack. So Shed, tries to calm him down. So he says, "Oh, I have something here for you," and it looks like a joint, but I'm assuming it's some sort of sedative. So Shed passes it to him, but before Alex can catch it, you hear a clunking sound, and the sedative goes flying in a different direction. Then you see the shock and horrified looks from Naomi, Alex, and Amos until we finally see that Shed just had his head blown off. I loved the way this was done. It was done so amazingly well. Just the way, they started with the reactions of the others before the big reveal made it so much more shocking, and it emphasizes how quick and random this would be. And I think few other spaceship shows managed to capture this feeling. However, after the initial shock, Naomi takes charge to seal the breaches before they all suffocate. Now, in the novels, it was Holden who takes charge, as I explained. He's there since he's the viewpoint character, so he has to be there in order for the reader to experience the moment that Shed loses his head. So it's his voice that is the calming voice that is able to keep everyone focused and work together to stay alive, which I actually thought worked better. However, I think the moment of Shed's death was elevated so much by the way it was filmed. I remember this being a truly shocking moment in TV history. Seeing Shed, even though Shed wasn't that memorable of a character, just the way it was done was just pure randomness of it, something you rarely see in television, which I believe has an even greater impact than it did in the novels, so +4. So then we go back to the bridge where the other ships stop firing, and they realize that's because they're gonna board the Dollinger. Then Lopez brings it to Ya's attention that Holden recognizes the attacking ships as the one that destroyed the Canterbury, so she orders him to take Holden off the ship so he can testify. So again, not in the novels, and it should be noted in the novels, the character that was ordered to take Holden off the ship was Lieutenant Kelly, not Lopez. But as I explained in the previous episode, Kelly and Lopez were condensed into one character for the show, although show Lopez seems to be taking more of Lieutenant Kelly's storyline from the books than it is Lopez from the books, so it makes me wonder why they didn't just call him Kelly. Perhaps they liked the name Lopez better. Anyway, this scene is fine, so 0. Next, we go back to the Holden room where Naomi reasons that they're completely surrounded by vacuums, so they're trapped. And this specifically didn't happen in the novels, because in the novels they explained that they had to be no vacuum on the other side of the door for sound to travel, and Alex was banging on the door so the Marines could hear them, and they did hear them, and they rescued them. Here in the show, Naomi reasons they don't have much oxygen left, so in order for them to survive for longer, one of them should take a sedative to use less oxygen, and they reason it should be Alex before to be the one to take it. Now, nothing like this happened in the books, as they were rescued long before it became an issue. But I actually think this added a nice little bit of tension. Plus, we see Amos and Naomi holding hands like they're going to die, which also added a nice emotional texture. So I'll give this a +3. We then go back to Holden, who's being escorted by Lopez and a group of Marines off the ship, where Holden wants to go rescue his friends, but Lopez won't let him. He then argues with one of the Marines that says he'd rather just let Holden die when they all come under attack, and Holden takes the opportunity to run off. In the novels, the Marines escorting Holden were actually quite nice to them. They were curt, and they made it clear that they were only saving their lives because they were ordered to, but they never insulted them or anything like that, so I don't really see the point of this, so -1. We then cut back to series where Miller enlists Musk's help to examine the dead body to find out who he is, and they realize he has implants meant to send out false IDs. Musk then reasons that he's some sort of high-class criminal, and they extract an implant from his leg and find out he's a data broker. Again, nothing like this happens in the books. I suppose they added this to try to deepen the mystery of Julie Mao, but as a show watcher who hadn't read the books when I first watch this episode, I just found this really confusing. So I think it detracts rather than adds to anything. It is interesting, though, that Miller brings up Havelock and how he hasn't heard from him, but doesn't think anything of it, alluding to the fact that Havelock got stabbed with that spike, so this makes it clear they're not yet aware of it. But overall, I just found this scene a waste of time, so -1. So Miller then calls Havelock and asks him to cover for him, an interesting thing to ask someone who is MIA, but we then cut to someone discovering Havelock's body with a spike through him, and she goes to steal his wallet, and when surprise, he's alive. Now, I know a lot of people found it really hard to believe that Havelock could survive a spike being driven through his chest like that, and I'm among them. This is unbelievable, and a bit ridiculous if I'm being frank. In the novels, this never happened to him, and it was reported that this happened to some random Martian that got stabbed through a spike, and guess what? That person died. As they should. So this was a bit ridiculous, so -3. So then we go back to the Dollinger where Holden is trying to get to his people, and he finds a bunch of dead Martians where a battle apparently took place. He sees the body of a few invaders as well, and when he goes to examine one, that person grabs a hold of Holden, who then threatens to shoot him if he doesn't let go, but the man simply says, "You won't." And he's like has this very psychotic feel to him, which actually sets up really nicely the army of sociopaths that Protogen employs, which was really great foreshadowing. Nothing like this occurred in the novels, and I thought this was a great way to hint at the bigger mystery, so +3. Then Lopez and the Marines show up to save Holden, and one says, "Mole's dead, asshole," implying that they're blaming his death on Holden, which is funny considering in the novels Mole purposely stayed behind and gave his life so that Holden and the others could get away. Anyway, Lopez insists that Holden come with them, and Holden insists that they go save his friends. Lopez wonders why he's so hell-bent on saving strangers that he owes nothing to, but Holden arranges a deal that if they save them, that they'll all testify. So this is interesting because in the novels, as I said, Holden was with the others in the holding cell when the battle occurred, so none of these things happened. Further, the Marines showed up to save them without any coaxing from them. Lieutenant Kelly simply said he was under orders to do so. He never really specified why those orders were given. I didn't have to promise to testify or anything like that. There was no talk on whom the ship belongs to or what Holden and his team knew. They simply just came in and rescued them and took them to the ship. And frankly, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think this whole "let me save my people" thing was a bit unnecessary, so -1. So Holden comes in just in the nick of time to save them, and then Lopez plans to take them all out. Holden then confronts Lopez about Phoebe Station as he keeps hearing about it, but doesn't know what it's about. So Lopez explains that they were ordered there after Phoebe Station was silent for 2 weeks, and when they arrived, they found that everyone there was killed and all the data was destroyed, and they don't know why. Now, we later learn it was Protogen stealing the protomolecule that was discovered on Phoebe, but this is great foreshadowing that wasn't in the novels at all. Phoebe wasn't even mentioned until much later, but I like this as it adds a lot to the mystery, so +2. So Lopez then informs Holden that Yao has ordered the ship to be destroyed. Now, in the novels, Kelly doesn't tell Holden this, rather Alex reasons out that if there are 3 critical locations, and if one of these locations are breached, then one of the other 2 will destroy the ship. In fact, Holden ruminates over how boarding a ship is very dangerous, as it's just a race against time to take the ship before those on board are able to destroy it, and he had his money on Yao, which apparently was a good bet. Anyway, they arrive in the bay and attempt to board a ship to get out of there, but are surrounded by intruders shooting at them, so Holden and his crew make a run for it while Lopez and his Marines give them cover fire. Now, in the novels, there was only 2 Marines left at this stage, and one of them circled around to another location to draw the enemy fire and make it seem like he was several people or an entire platoon, while Lieutenant Kelly stayed behind to give them cover fire. And of course, Alex wasn't limp, and it was in fact Amos who got injured running for the ship, but either way is fine, so I'll give this a 0. So Alex and Amos make it to the ship, but while Holden and Naomi are running, the ship loses gravity and they start floating off course. So Holden does this maneuver by kicking Naomi away to push himself back down so he can lock his boots to the ground, and then he pulls her back, and then they go on the ship. Now, this is pretty much the way it went down in the books, although it may have been slightly different. I think possibly gravity was always out the whole time. They just lost their footing because they came under fire. But Holden did the same maneuver. But I have to give massive props to the show for doing this, as it's very easy to write something like this on the page, but to actually film it is another matter. And it would have been very easy for the showrunners, producers, studio, or whatever to go, no, this is too expensive, cut this out. But they didn't, and they went for it, and it looks amazing, absolutely brilliant choreography, brilliant stunt work, and it adds so much to the tension of the chase. It's just so beautiful. So even though it isn't that much change from the books, just being able to pull this off so amazingly well, I'm giving this a +4. So Holden and Naomi make it to the ship to join Amos and Alex, and then Lopez follows shortly behind, but all the other Marines are dead, and he is very badly injured. He tells Holden that he's not a pilot and someone else needs to fly, so Holden grabs Alex and throws him towards the navigation, where he tries to protest, but Holden simply yells, "Go!" Now, in the novels, Lieutenant Kelly himself ordered Alex to fly the ship because he knows that Alex has navigation experience, but the distinction doesn't really matter. Also here, we see Holden helping Lopez down, whereas in the novels, when Holden tries to help Lieutenant Kelly, he yells at him and says, "Don't fucking touch me." So, slight difference there too, but I actually find it more exciting this way, especially the way Holden throws Alex towards the navigation, so I'm going to give this a +2. So next we see Alex fly the ship away, and he shoots railguns at their pursuers and also fires at the opening in the ship so they can leave. Now in the novels they didn't need to do that, and they made more of a show of Alex firing on their pursuers, as they made it clear that once they were in the ship they were in no danger whatsoever from them, but they saw them kill the other Marine who stayed behind to cover for them, and they kept shooting him even after he was down. So Alex opened up on them with the railguns, which again the show kind of underplayed how gruesome of a death this would be for the invaders, as those guns were meant for ship-to-ship combat, so using them on people is a very gruesome thing. But everyone was okay with Alex doing this, after all, all that they'd just been through. And I actually missed that, and I thought it was a nice touch, so -1. So next we see the Tachi fly away and go back to the bridge of the Dollinger, where they are about to be overrun by intruders. And Captain Yao simply says, "I didn't think we could lose." And then she orders the ship to be destroyed, and you see the Dollinger explode, taking all the intruding ships with it. Now, in the novels, we don't actually see the Dollinger explode. Holden passes out when Alex does a high-G burn, and then he wakes up 20 minutes later, and Alex tells him the Dollinger self-destructed. I think it was much cooler actually seeing it, especially seeing the look on Captain Yao when she knew that they lost. This actor did such an amazing job, especially for a small part. It's often easy for shows to fumble with casting of guest actors, but she sold the agony in her eyes so well. It was heartbreaking, making the destruction of the Dollinger that more impactful and powerful, so +3. So Alex whoops as he flies the ship away, and then Holden passes out, and then the episode ends. So my final adaptation score for CQB is a +17. By far the highest score yet, and this episode deserves it, as it was nothing short of amazing and proved what a great TV show this could be. Sure, the Miller stuff was a bit of a waste of time and kind of boring. However, it's kind of the same thing in the novels, as the Battle of the Dollinger is split into 2 chapters, so it's interrupted by a Miller chapter, and while I was reading this, I remember screaming, "No!" I was very tempted to just skip over the Miller chapter and go back to the battle. So the show is kind of no different in that regard. At least we stayed with this battle when it mattered. But to actually see these events unfold and the way it was pulled off was amazing, making this a very strong adaptation indeed. So that's it for my book-to-show comparison for CQB. I'll be back in a few weeks with my book-to-show comparison for episode 5. In the meantime, you can check out my channel as I do many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Mr. Robot, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.